What's going on, guys? Overhauling the whole garage gym. You guys can stay tuned for that. And as I was doing that, I was going through and sorting a very big heap of resistance bands, specifically loop bands. Those are my personal preferences. I'll get into that here in a second. And I got all sorts of materials. I got fabric, I got silicone, I got latex, different types of latex, different lengths. And I thought this would be a perfect opportunity. And I'm surprised I never did a video like this. Kind of going through somewhat of a buyer's guide and some differences, pros and cons of different lengths, how you would use different lengths, or some pros and cons of those. Also different types of materials. And I've done this in the past, but never in one video, talking about things such as latex versus silicone, versus fabric bands, and also again the varying degrees. I'm gonna try and do this as condensed as possible. There'll be timestamps down below. I'm gonna cover a wide variety of companies here. I've told other companies I just can't handle any more resistance band affiliates. I think I'm covering the best in the business personally, but I will talk about all sorts of band brands on Amazon. Also talk about some other companies I have here. I think I have an affiliate for everything, but you can get an affiliate for every company. But with that being said, I have some of the steepest discount codes on some of these. So I will talk about that as well as a shameless plug. If you guys do want to pick up any of these, help support me and the channel. Now I am talking specifically about loop-based bands. I've said this many times, I'm just not a big fan of tube-based bands because they require an anchor point. Take a little more time to kind of set up. They do have their pros and cons compared to these, but I just find these are more versatile. They can be used for a variety of functions and uses for travel. Easy to kind of transition between exercises. I'm sitting on this Squat Max MD, which also uses resistance bands. Of course, you can use a squat rack, barbell, even weight stacks can use loop bands. I just find loop bands to be the most advantageous and just kind of biggest bang for your buck across the board. Not to mention the various differences in lengths that they're now currently on the market. Point is, you can use these for almost everything. And I find them to be fairly durable compared to tube-based bands, which generally can snap a little bit easier. These loop-based bands can seem very different, and that is because of the type of latex, how they are manufactured, even how they're conditioned is something I didn't know about, but the length, the width, all makes a difference. So when someone says, I've seen this once in a while, people will say, well, you just slap a label on it and they're all the same, get the cheapest one possible. I'll just say that is definitely not true. I've come to learn a lot more about that. Of course, there are big margins in bands, and I've talked about that compared to, say, free weights. But when you're talking about really cheap bands, so here's what I'm sitting on here. And sometimes I do like cheap bands. I encourage cheap bands because if you're don't spend a whole lot of money for something you don't know if you're gonna stick to. But cheap bands have more of a stretch to them sometimes. So sometimes I actually go out of my way to buy, I bought in a few sets of resistance bands that are very cheap. And this is still latex, but much more of a stretch, has kind of like almost a give and then a secondary give. I know that if I were to really yank on this hard enough, I could probably snap this and cause a rip. But I've used this one, which looks thick and it says 60 to 100 pounds. Never trust this whole weight tension here. That, you know, I just go off a feeling that even though it says this is much more pliable compared to, say, something like this Serious Steel. Obviously this one's thicker, but compared to, say, maybe this Clench one, which is definitely stiffer. You can tell by feeling this in your hand, just the stretch, it's a little more of a higher quality. So this is a layered latex. Layered latex is definitely better than molded latex. Molded latex is, when you go on Amazon, something that's below, I'm not gonna call any names or companies, I don't know for sure, but when you get something that's below, like in a set of 5 that is, say, less than $50, less than $30, especially if it's going on sale, you can bet that it's most likely gonna be molded. And I would say it's not always the case, but you kind of are getting what you pay for. When you buy a set of bands of 5, say it could be Clench or Serious Steel, Rogue, something like that, and it's more than $100, you're not necessarily getting, people might think I'm getting ripped off because I can buy a 5-set band on Amazon that looks somewhat similar. Trust me, they're different and they're priced that way accordingly. Of course, there's always margins there, but there's ones like SunPow, I like those guys too. Point is, they're thinner, they're not as, I would say, conditioned as some of the other bands with latex. So with latex bands, I just found generally if they're a good quality company, say like Serious Steel, Clench, got some Rogue ones over here, generally they're gonna be layered, meaning when they start kind of being worn, it's almost like a car tire, you'll start seeing this kind of a fray. If you see a nick in any band, you never want that because you want to basically throw it away because that'll just be essentially a straw that puts the camel's back and it will break. But point is, they can be conditioned. Now the condition means like once they kind of form the latex, it can kind of, you kind of, I guess the factory has to like sit in a certain period of time in some temperature controlled area. So that makes it a little more stiffer versus other ones might be a little more pliable. I learned that from Harambe. They make some bands, and I'll talk about them maybe in a second with their smaller diameter bands. But first, I'll just say latex. You want to look for latex, layered latex. Generally, the best ones are always made in Sri Lanka. But compare that to say something like a fabric band, and I've covered these from Vector Athletics, got some good promo codes with them. They made these great fabric bands, which I was never really, didn't know much about until I tried it. I got a whole separate review on the channel for that. The benefits of a fabric band, there is actually latex underneath this. It's just a little more comfortable in the hand, and these are 41 inches. I would only really get these for travel and more so for comfort. Then you have something such as silicone, which is these over here. The silicone set, also from Vector Athletics. I've covered this, very cool, kind of colorful colors. More of a softer feel, has a little bit more gradual kind of give compared to latex. It's hypoallergenic, so if you're allergic to latex, these are gonna be kind of your best bet. Not a giant difference. I personally think your best bet is always gonna be layered latex as far as long-term durability, but if you're looking for something that's just a little bit different, softer in the hands, fabric or a silicone, another great way to go. The next question is gonna be, what length should you get? I get this question a lot with, they're gonna see bands on a machine in a video, or people asking my preference. So I am 6 feet tall. That's good for some context here, but 9 times out of 10, again, if you're buying or looking into loop style resistance bands, the standard dimension is going to be 41 inches. And this 41 inches really came about because this is more so been used, at least what I'm assuming, is from the powerlifting community. These were called power bands. They also go by something else initially, but point is the standard was always 41 inches for whatever reason. I think that's a good versatile, length for a number of things. Throwing on a barbell, a squat rack, a machine. You can loop it around multiple times to kind of find your ideal setting. Shameless plug, I'm gonna throw in my collar hooks. You'll see a whole nother video about this. You can throw this onto any 2-inch collar and then throw some resistance bands on here. Saves longevity of the bands. You can get super creative. You guys will see some of that in the future. Horrible Salesman, he's been out for a while. I have nothing to do a video on it. You guys can find these at Serious Steel. There's gonna be on some other vendors. Of course, you can go to collarhooks.com. Just a quick FYI, if you guys do see this, there is a little nick here. That's not a nick, that's basically held in a wire. These are powder coated, USA made. If you guys don't know anything about the powder coating process, there has to be a wire somewhere, and at this point in time, there's nowhere to really hide that wire for powder coating, so you're gonna see something right there. Nothing wrong with your product. I digress though, but why that's kind of relevant is because if you're gonna use these, say, on a barbell, it depends on the length of the barbell. So I'm 6 feet tall. My wife, if I use a shorter, say, resistance band barbell, that might be, something like maybe about this big. If you're someone who's maybe 5'1", 5 to like 5'8", so when she uses something like that, she's in the shorter side, I think she's 5'1.5", something like that, that 41 inches isn't gonna be a whole lot of resistance out of the gate, So she's gonna want something that's gonna be smaller in diameter. I would say as a cutoff, if you're doing something that is a smaller barbell, and I say smaller because if you're using a full length barbell, say with something like collar hooks, you're doing things like curls, overhead presses, bent over rows, might not be a big deal because these are already pretty much stretched out pretty far. So they're actually gonna be fine probably with a 41-inch bar for most people. But if you're looking at using something smaller, like a resistance band bar that's out there, or you can use these on a 4-foot bar, 2 for that matter, you might want to look into something that has a smaller diameter. You have something that would be 37 inches. Serious Steel made their kind of famous smaller diameter from 41 to 37 fairly recently, a while back. And I think we're the first ones to do this. Harambe also makes 38 inch, a little bit inch bigger than this in diameter. Harambe is famous for really good quality bands. They're conditioned, I think the longest is what the owner told me, meaning they're kind of been set longer, which makes them a little bit more just stiffer bands. They're too hard for me, honestly. I like a little bit of a give. Do have a promo code for Harambe in case you guys do want to pick those out. But I would say the 37-inch bands are really going to be ideal for somebody who's maybe on the shorter side. I shouldn't say shorter side. I guess the more personal preference. When you get below, say, I don't know, 5'8"-ish, and you just want more tension out of the gates, I would just say that too. I would say try that 37 inches. I use these a lot. I have used these a lot for over the back chest presses, anchored tricep extensions, but this blue one does feel pretty good if you want more tension out of the initial kind of, initial part of the grease out of a bicep curl or anything else. So these are practical for people who maybe do prefer them. But again, I'd probably like something like this inch, maybe 1.25 inch width setting is probably my favorite. So this blue Serious Steel is pretty decent. So there's that. I would consider, again, more on the shorter side and using also a shorter bar. If you're going a longer bar, you're definitely gonna want like a full-size barbell. You're still gonna want your 41-inch bands. Then we're moving over here to 32-inch. So Serious Steel actually had these first. I don't know why they initially made these. I think from what I heard from the owner, they made these to go along with things like the X3. or a band board bar system, and they realized they were just too small. And I agree with that. When I first time I tried these, I'm like, these are functionally just not really usable, at least with resistance band setups. These are a good distance to make things a little bit tighter out of the gate. Say if you did have a weight stack with a pin to loop them around there a couple times to make them a little stiffer, but just a little bit, too taut. I have heard some people that actually do use these that are maybe around that 5 foot area that want something kind of comparable. If you were 6 foot and you wanted 37 inches, so you're 5 foot, you want somewhat tougher, 32-inch diameters. Might be pretty good, but I think for most people though, probably too small of a diameter. But as I say that, there are even shorter ones. There's a 12-inch band. I think Rogue calls these a shorty. I think Sirius still makes one too. I think I got this from them. But depends what you want to use it for. If you just want something that's 12 inches in diameter, for whatever reason, I guess abduction, you could throw these on a weight stack too. That would also work out pretty good. So they do make these smaller 12-inch ones. I'd say for most people, again, probably not really necessary. And I won't even go super heavy because that's the other question. Well, how heavy should you get? I think most people, the sweet spot is something like, my favorite are this pair right here of Clench. So they're about 1 inch thick. This is their purple. I've had a bunch of other companies. Sirius Steel, I think, is their blue over here. This is their blue 41 inch. You can see I'm surrounded by bands here. Very similar. I can tell you these two are almost feeling a little bit identical, but the build quality is different. So I think this tension, this height is good. This is really for the rare breed of people who are looking to do something super heavy. If you're doing squatting, deadlifting, let's say like an X3, Harambe, some sort of band board bar setup. This is that territory. Just jumping into 41-inch mega bands. Might as well go this way right now. I got my Rogue, purple, red. These are actually, I use these as a nice little sweet spot between the Elite X3, which was orange. I know you guys are looking at this and like, I know I'm not using all these bands. Not everyone's gonna wanna buy all these bands. It's just a culmination of reviews and stuff I picked up over time. So this is overkill for sure. This Sirius Steel right here, this gray, super thick. I don't think you're ever gonna use this. I even have the Blue Kong Harambe, which I still don't know reason why I would ever use that. It's just too big of a band. That one and even this one fit in here no problem. Just gonna show you guys that with the collar hooks. And actually this is a 1/2 inch thick steel, American made steel, hand finished. Trying to sell you guys in this. Holds it fine. This is really only gonna be necessary, guys, if you're looking at doing, I would say, heavy squats, heavy deadlifts. 9 times out of 10 though, I'm not even really messing with these things. The heaviest I'm going was probably maybe like this Sirius Steel Black, the X3 Black, something like that. I do think for me though, I actually prefer, other than something that is maybe this size, I do like super small bands like this, either for just stacking purposes. This might even be the Harambe. No, I don't think it is. But stuff like this that you can add gradual tension, this is definitely a very cheap one. I can tell right now I could easily just snap this if I wanted to, but this does have its purpose. And I just find these small ones to be good for a vast majority of people, for what people are using them, say, for single joint exercises. Again, if you want something that's more multi-joint, squats, deadlifts, you're gonna want something thicker. This is the last point, is if you are buying some bands, consider getting a pair of bands. That's something I've regretted a few times. Clench hooked me up a while back about giving me a couple pairs. So as much as I do use, probably this purple one's probably one of the most used bands I have. A lot of times for things like leg press or even the Squat Max, I've always wanted a pair of bands. So consider that if it's a little cheaper and it costs you saves you some money to get a pair of these bands. Even if you're using one predominantly, you can always switch off between which ones you're using. It's always good to have a pair in case you want to, say, use them on a dual weight stack or, again, barbells on each side for something like that. That's really it, guys. Hopefully this was informative. I was gonna say entertaining. I probably wasn't that entertaining. At the end of the day, I don't think you need tons of them. I already said this a few times. To me, if I were to pick 3 different settings, it would be probably pair of something about this size, pair about this size, and then maybe a pair of something a little bit more on the thicker side if I had to pick 3. But a lot of times you can go on these websites, Sirius Steel Clench, I got Elite FTS here too, or Rogue, and just get their set. The only thing I don't like about a set though is that, again, you're not gonna get doubles. So that would be something I would consider. Thanks again for watching, guys. If you want to see other resistance band content, let me know. And I'll be got some other cool stuff in the near future with resistance bands. You can look forward to that. Please like, share, subscribe if you found this at all helpful, and I'll see you guys on the next video.